Hey there. Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost, and welcome to the TRU Community Gathering. It's a Friday, so we're having a TRU Community Gathering. We've done this every Friday since April 17th, 2020. So I think this is about 164th. I've lost count, but I'm going to actually count and have it back on track next week, so I can say exactly how many weeks it's been. But it's been 164 consecutive conversations, with the exception of one Christmas and one New Year. We've been talking about all sorts of stuff. The real reason I did this was because we're all freaked out by COVID back in 2020. You all remember that. Happy to say that COVID is no longer considered a dire threat. We no longer have mask mandates. We no longer have to quarantine. We have medicine that can take care of it, and we have vaccines and all that. And I've had 4 vaccines, and I've also had 4 cases of COVID. So in spite of everything, COVID is still with us. Take it from me, it's still there. It's a gift that keeps on giving. So we all still need to be a little careful, or at least considerate of each other. We started off talking about surviving quarantine and how to deal with just not being able to be with people. And people thought it was a good idea when I said maybe I'll get a Zoom room and open up a Zoom room and talk about what we were going through. And also, as my want for the past 30 years of running TRU, I always bring in interesting people to have interesting conversations, I hope, about theater. We're back to a somewhat of a normal. I'm trying to say we're back to a new normal here, but the whole point of today's conversation is that things are not what they used to be. So with or without COVID, we're still having a lot to deal with in theater. It's not been easy, and there's a lot of challenges going on. I think most of us are aware of some of them. I think that we read the newspaper and hear the news. I guess people don't read the newspaper anymore, do they? I think I do. I'm the only one. They read things online, and they listen to the newscasts, so you know that there's problems. There's lots of troubles in our world, and we're going to talk about some of what's going on today. I chose to do this from a legal perspective. I thought it would be interesting and a little less emotional to talk about what's happening and sort of look at it in terms of legalities. I think not everything's going to be strictly legal, though. I think there's going to be Gordon and Eric, my 2 guests, are going to have a lot of their own personal feelings that I welcome them to bring into this discussion. And if they choose to, since they're careful lawyers, they'll probably let you know when it's opinion and when it's fact. I'm going to bring them in right now so we can actually get started on a conversation about what's going on in theater. Specifically, the things that we're going to take note of is the fact that there is an ongoing writers' strike. The Writers Guild is on strike. The Actors Equity is an Actors Equity. SAG and AFTRA in California have joined the strike in support of the Writers Guild. The Tony Awards wasn't scripted. TV's not being scripted right now. A lot of stuff's going on, and I'm not sure how much of it has to do with COVID, although COVID certainly hasn't helped anything. Let's start by meeting our guests. I'm very clever. I have one on the West Coast and one on the East Coast. So Eric, I've known you the longest. You're my New York friend. Say hello and tell us a little bit about you.
Hello. I am one of, what are there, 4 Erics on this call today?
At least.
Yeah. We have a surplus of Erics. I am an entertainment lawyer. I've been focused primarily in theater since about '96, although I do work in a number of other industries, including music, streaming, film, pretty much everything. I do a fair amount of work with TRU. What else do you want to know? I'm not really big about talking about myself. Plus, it's Friday afternoon, and I'm ready.
Okay, well, I think that gives them a basic idea. let's meet Gordon next. Gordon, come on and you say hi in your booming radio voice.
Well, hi, everybody. No, I'm kidding. Hi, everybody. I'm Gordon Firemark. I, too, am an entertainment lawyer. I'm also an educator and an entrepreneur in the digital course business and things like that. And I've been practicing for about 30 years, sort of equal helpings of theater, film, television, and the digital stuff, whatever that has been over the course of things. And nowadays, it's all sort of converged so much that you can't really do one without touching the others. And yeah, the one thing I have sort of stayed away from for quite a while is the traditional recorded music industry, which is the closest thing to organized crime in the entertainment industry, as far as I'm concerned.
Well,
So.
that's provocative.
Well, and that's partly, well, I had some experiences when I was doing music with my own clients and their guns and my desk, and it got sort of crazy. So I got out of the record business, but very happy to be doing the rest of the stuff that I do. And
well, let's start with COVID. Let's start with shutdown. From a legal point of view, how have things changed now that we're coming back to live performance? I think, Gordon, you're going to have to help me keep splitting my focus between movie and live performance. I'm used to talking about live performance, but you do as much with the film and TV world, I think. So Eric, how have contracts changed? What have we been doing during the 2 years of shutdown, and what are we doing now? And how is it impacting the business other than raising budgets? Let's talk about that. A lot of it's basic and obvious, but let's just name it.
You know, I think it's more interesting to talk about what hasn't changed than what has changed. I mean, certainly when you are doing contracts now for productions, you have to have a COVID compliance officer, and you have to have a procedure in place. And of course, you have to have plans for illness in the cast. What's shocking to me is that we have not managed to make theaters healthier work environments, and we have not managed to make theaters healthier viewing environments. We're still running an industry where, in order for productions to be profitable, houses have to be packed. We're still cramming casts and musicians into spaces far too small for healthy working conditions. And while we make a great show of embracing health, we really have not kind of addressed the fundamental challenges to the theater environment that make it unhealthy. And I personally believe, for an industry that depends on tourists and depends on senior citizens, particularly Asian tourists, these are very health conscious people. And I think one of the huge challenges we are having is that these people are just not willing to crowd into a theater and risk infection anymore. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle. So I don't know what it's going to take for the industry to embrace this new health awareness on the part of its core constituency, its core audience. But people forget. I am not sadly, but I am old enough to remember back in the 80s, the Schuberts tried to get a loan using their theaters as collateral, and they were denied. So we think that theater is inevitable. We think it's permanent. We think it's indestructible. It is not. Just like people think that prestigious not-for-profits like Lincoln Center or Manhattan Theater Club are permanent and
okay, we're there. We're there already. We are
there. The public, that was really stunning.
Okay, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna parse some of that a little bit later. But let me just respond to a couple things that you're saying. First of all, I have to, with great surprise, tell everybody we're not going to solve the theater's problems today. we're going to identify them pretty much. And I don't know what kind of solutions there are to what you're saying, Eric, to be honest. One of the things you're not mentioning is that because of COVID, we're much more understudy conscious. Are theaters and shows still packing in more understudies than they used to, or is that thinning out now? Do you know?
I personally don't know the answer to that.
During COVID, basically, the idea was to have as many understudies as possible because you don't know how many of your cast members are going to be unable to go on. I don't know if that's still in practice. I think it probably is to some degree. You wouldn't know, would you, Gordon?
No, I mean, I'm sort of hearing rumblings that the producing side is trying to cut back on the expense of all of that a little bit, but they're just as concerned that, that they don't want to have to cancel a performance because too many people are out. So they're walking a tightrope on that one right now, I think.
I think that even when we had mask mandate, I'm not sure that were theaters. Yeah, well, Music Man was selling full houses all through COVID. So that's one part of the equation. That's really one of the things that's going on. That's one of the things that I think brought a lot of things to our attention. I didn't want to get to the not-for-profits yet. I wanted to still look a little bit at the contracts. Gordon, have contracts changed at all during shutdown? And some of this might actually be reflected on why there's a writers guild. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the contracting has changed a little bit. I'm seeing mostly in the force majeure and the remedies side of the questions of, what happens if, what constitutes a force majeure, is a pandemic related thing, or is, audience illness. I mean, some producers are saying, hey, we can't. In the film side, they're not as worried about it, but the theater folks out here are saying, hey, if we can't fill all 99 seats in our little theater over here, what are we going to do? And so we are seeing
seats.
Well, on the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Getting they're looking for their exit plans sooner in the contracts. Yeah.
Well, everybody's playing at full houses. Nobody's socially distancing. Unfortunate for me.
Well, I'll tell you, the small theaters out here are having a really hard time putting butts in seats. They always have, but it's a little different when going to a show at the music center, or a Broadway show is an event that people really look forward to. People used to go to theater sort of as a matter of course, just because they love theater, and that's not happening. It really has to be more attractive to them to get people out of their living rooms these days, at least in the smaller theater community.
Eric,
I will tell you one other contract thing that I'm personally doing. I'm seeing it in other places too, including streaming, discussions of streaming in option agreements, because it is mandatory, especially if you want to take your show to a regional, to have the authors pre-approve streaming your performances, because the regionals, again, rely on senior citizens, and the senior citizens have come to understand that they can stream it at home. So streaming is here to stay within certain parameters. I don't know that it's sufficient to support a standalone theater streaming service. I know many have tried. I've worked for one or two myself, but that is kind of a new term, clarifying that that streaming is not a subsidiary right. The producer controls the right to stream performances of the producer's show. The author doesn't control that. And what are the terms that apply? How does the author benefit when a show is streamed? That's something that is working its way into agreements.
Well, the other thing about that is that equity has never been very, very comfortable with any live show being filmed. So how has that changed now? I mean, I know that one of the things that happened during COVID is that there was a little bit of a conversation between SAG-AFTRA and equity about whose whose responsibility it was when people are doing streamed shows. And it came to land in SAG-AFTRA's ballpark. But now that's changed again. No, we were always, I'm telling you, we were always directed by Equity after a certain point where they stopped fighting it. They just said, okay, if it's being done, filmed and streamed, fine. But now we're at a place where it's not just filmed and streamed, it's also what you're talking about, which is live performances that are going to have a streaming component. And I think there's specific contracts about that now.
Equity has worked out an agreement with the regionals, rules that pertain to the regionals' ability to stream performances. In order to access the stream, you have to have bought a ticket. You can't download it, or there's very limited viewing after the fact. There are very strict rules, and this is because, you know, within Equity there are people who believe the minute you record in any way, photograph, film an actor's image, that the actor is entitled to additional compensation. And because Equity is basically a collective, there are constituencies within Equity that need to be accommodated. So it was kind of terrific, I think, that Equity and the regionals were able to work this out. I don't think it's applicable to commercial productions yet.
No, they dipped their toe in the water. They allowed towards the end of COVID, before officially was declared over. They did allow some streaming. It was what was that show? What was that play that they streamed it and also had a performance of it, and it still didn't keep it running. One of the BIPOC pieces, it was can't think of it right now. Anyway,
I'll tell you, on this arena, this subject of streaming, I've encountered a few times where I've had some sort of push and pull on behalf of playwrights or authors dealing with publishers, and the publishers conflating the idea of an archival recording with a stream, such as Eric's been describing. And so, Eric, I don't know if you've encountered that trouble over language in those arenas.
I haven't gotten that type of pushback yet. You mean from music publishers?
Well, no, a play publishing company will say, we have the right to archival recording, and you know, we can authorize any production to do an archival recording. And then they go on to talk about what they're really talking about is a streaming presentation for those who can't or won't come to the theater. But then there's this recording. So they're doing essentially a multimedia production that is recorded and then streaming in place of real live performances of the show. And that's pretty troubling when you're the creator of the underlying work. So
yeah, it would be
something to be watching for in your publishing contracts, at least. So
this also brings up another thing that I'm aware of that you are very well versed in, Gordon, which is basically the blurred lines. The industries are having blurred lines. I mean, I would say that there was a blurred line between theater and film during COVID.
Yeah.
But now it's even more complicated than that, and a lot of it has to do with streaming and the new prevalency of streaming as probably one of the leading commercial art forms right now, or entertainment forms. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, I think that everybody who is creating media nowadays, and we'll call theater media, what is media for the same purpose, everybody is thinking about this other channel of distribution. For some, it's the main channel of distribution now. So independent filmmakers aren't expecting to have a theatrical release anymore unless they're extraordinary for some reason. They're going straight to the streamers. And I think that some of the theater folks that are doing streams are looking to go wider with it. And, you know, it's all about money, really. I don't know where I'm going with that thought, but
well, one of the things that I put in my editorial about what we're doing today, and you guys didn't respond to it one way or the other. I mean, I do think that streaming has gained a new respectability that it didn't have 3 or 4 years ago,
Mhm.
especially due to shutdown, because it was the main form of entertainment for most of the population. So it was outperforming in many ways network television,
Sure.
and it suddenly becomes eligible for Oscars. So what's the difference between TV streaming and movies now at this point?
Oh, I don't know. 20 years from now, we'll have some court rulings that will tell us the answer to that question. But it's actually one of the things that lawyers are really grappling with, is where are the boundaries between these different media? When you create something like you're making a feature film and then you distribute it through a channel that looks more like television, but then it's streaming, so it's an over-the-top, it's on-demand content. Again, when representing rights holders, we're seeing that crossover become an issue because the payment structures are different depending on where it's intended to go first and what happens second. And with podcasting and what I'll call micro digital media, we have more of the same kinds of issues. Well, I wrote a screenplay intending for it to be a film, and I sold an option to these guys, and instead of making a feature, they made a podcast. And they're only
there's a
paying
lot
me
of that going
podcast
around.
money.
There's a lot of that going around right now.
Yeah.
So how does that work in terms of the legalities of all of this? How do we know, as writers, as creative artists, how do we know what contract we should be expecting for what we're doing? It just seems so
I
so
think
all
we're
over the place.
Yeah, I think we're in a moment in time where having expectations is a mistake, and sort of waiting for what arrives to arrive and then addressing those concerns. I mean, that's what we lawyers do anyway.
And isn't some of this at the heart of the Writers Guild strike? I mean, we're going to talk about AI as well. But
it's all related. Yeah.
so can you talk about how that's related? What are the specific things that the Writers Guild is asking for that is not happening?
Well, one of the issues dealing with in the strikes, both the SAG-AFTRA and the Writers Guild, is some sort of accountability for when the streams happen. Decades and decades ago, actors and writers conceded on upfront salary payments for the work that they were doing, or purchase prices on screenplays, because they were getting back-end compensation into the deal. The net profit participations and sometimes gross participations, box office bonuses, all of those things you could calculate because the theaters would report their income, how many tickets were sold and those kinds of things. But as we've moved into streaming, the streamers don't want to tell anyone how many people are watching that show this week and so on. And they surely don't want to be responsible for paying anybody on the basis of those numbers. And yet they're still taking, and the streamers have lower base salary prices, scale minimums in the guild contract. So that's one of the hot issues is, hey, we're taking less and less money on the front end and we're not getting anything on the back end when it's a Netflix or an Amazon Prime series or something like that. And we want to get paid with that. In the theater, how many tickets were sold. The streams are much harder to have any accountability around. And so that's a big issue. That's a money issue in the thing. And then, of course, go ahead.
The basic money issue in theater and film and anywhere is that the companies that are producing the product have escalating expenses in all aspects, all media.
Sure.
And then they have to find a way of monetizing, making money back for their investments.
Well,
and I know
go
that
ahead,
that's the studio position, and I know that's the one that everybody's the Writers Guild and
crocodile tears for the studio executives making $50 million, $60, $100 million.
I don't know. What do you tell them? What do you tell them now?
Well, I think first of all, you need to parse out the different types of revenue streams.
Yeah.
In theater, we have revenue streams that come from ticket sales, and then we have revenue streams that come from profits.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly, it's hard to fake revenue sales on Broadway. It's hard to fake the ticket sales numbers because they're reported. Gross weekly box office receipts are reported by a number of people. Profits are a different issue, and I do think that a I'm surprised that more people aren't talking about the history of what we call Hollywood accounting. There was a very famous lawsuit. Art Buchwald sued, I believe it was Paramount, over the film Coming to America.
Yep.
This was a film that grossed $288 million, but because of how the studio defined net profits, the movie never went into profits. And so they
movie
just
that cost $100 million to make and grossed 288. Yeah, so
but
how's
still
that not
lost
profit?
money based on the accounting. And I would not be surprised if there is some discussion with the streamers about their own version of Hollywood accounting. That it is not acceptable. This level of opaqueness that they have is not acceptable, and there's legal precedent for saying that. If you contract with someone to give them a share of profits, but then you refuse to account for profits in a responsible way, I think there is legal precedent for accountability.
Yeah.
There's historical precedent for it. I mean, look at music. You know, the entire reason we have broadcast BMI is because the way ASCAP was playing it, licensing people were not happy with the way they were opaque and the way they were, you know, deciding who got what.
Ed Levy is asking my question: what are profits that aren't from ticket sales, and is royalties an additional revenue stream that we should be talking about, or payout stream, I should say? It's not
we're talking about above the line and below the line. So down and dirty theatrical financing, you got your show up, you sell 1 million tickets a week, it costs $650,000 to run the show each week. Out of that 650, you've got your royalties going to your authors, your director, your choreographer, you've got your weeklies going to your general manager and your lawyer and wherever the hell else, whatever, and then you get your weekly net operating profits, right? Prior to recoupment, 100% of the weekly net operating profits go to the investors. After recoupment, 50% goes to the investors, 50% goes to the producers. So weeklies are above the line and profits are below the line. There is a similar concept of above the line and below the line in film. You know, above the line is the salaries that you're paying to people, and then below the line is the profit share, what people are supposed to get on the back end when everything else is paid for. But if a studio is charging overhead and insurance and interest on overhead and insurance, and it accumulates, and you know, paying itself for marketing, and there are ways to game the system. No matter how bad you think theatrical producers are, they do not approach the creativity of
and actually
Hollywood.
Just to tie the Buchwald suit in a bow for everybody, that case was, the ruling was in favor of Art Buchwald. Buchwald had submitted a treatment to Paramount, and he was supposed to get a piece of the profits of the film and all of that. The jury ruled in his favor, that they had, you know, they owed him the money. And then the rest of Hollywood basically twisted the arms of the people at Paramount to settle, so that the court wouldn't tell the Hollywood, you can't account that way anymore. So the system persists with this crazy funny money overhead on interest and interest on overhead. So the hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues never add up to enough to pay everything back. Yeah.
Yeah,
there it is. Yeah.
It's so much simpler with theater. I guess I'm gonna have a conversation with you, so you're gonna help me understand that bookkeeping, the Hollywood bookkeeping, because I even after you explained it, I'm still not sure I get it.
Even the accountants at the studios don't fully understand it.
It is designed to not be understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like derivatives, right? It was designed to not be understood. Just whichever way it went, you made money. That was the theory. Didn't work out that way. Yeah. But when you design a system to be confusing, it's confusing.
And you could put 3 different expert accountants on, on the job, and they would come up with 3 different bottom line numbers of what's due to whom, based on the same inputs. So it's sort of insane.
Amy is bringing up something that I don't know. What is the difference between residuals and royalties? I think she knows. I don't know.
The industry. Royalties are what you pay to someone for performances in real time when you're still working.
Mm.
You know, and residuals are what you get when you're done working, but the product is out there generating passive income. So you film the TV show, you're done, you're working on a movie, the show's out there earning money for you, it's a residual.
Yeah.
A royalty, you know, you're still, I guess the writer is technically done, although are writers ever really done?
Mm.
The directors are still supposed to be rendering services, maintaining the production.
I think a lot of the distinction in Hollywood comes from the fact that in film, the writer, I should say in television, the writer never owns the script. It belongs to the studio. So you don't pay royalties because you don't receive royalties because you're not a property owner. But residuals was a different word for the similar idea. Let's pay the writers something back end for the work they've done when there's success, so we don't have to pay them quite as much up front, and they take a little bit of the risk with us. And over the years, it's been abused and massaged and twisted all around. and now you hear about actors in very famous shows also entitled to residuals getting checks for 12 cents and things like that. So it's troublesome.
Amy Stoller says she often saw film projects go forward even though many contracts had not been signed. Does that still happen?
It does. I would say a little less so. Certainly on the independent side, everybody's being a little more diligent about getting everything signed because that. We see lawsuits around chain of title. Who owns this thing? Did you get the rights from the right people? So you want to have that as locked up as. But in the studio system, yeah, there's a lot of course of dealing relationships that you'll see that the film has been out in the theaters for weeks and they're still exchanging signature drafts of things.
So Amy was saying that was back in the late 1980s, but apparently, Amy, the answer is yes, that still does happen.
Yeah.
And Eric, does it happen in theater?
Not on my productions.
Yeah, I think theater is pretty well. There's a lot of oversight in theater, it seems. I know that you can't open your show if you haven't raised your full capitalization. Although people get around that too, but just in theory, that's not supposed to happen. And I can't imagine anybody opening up a Broadway show without having everything contractual completed.
I will tell you, I have seen two examples in the past couple of years, not my shows, where producers have gone out and they've taken investment funds and they've presented, developmental workshops, and they're moving down the road, and the writers say, okay, you don't have the rights and we're pulling the rights away from you. It happened just this year with someone we all know and love.
Yep, I know.
It happened about 5 years ago with another project with people we all know. It does happen. People rely on those relationships, and if you've got a show that's in development for 8 years and it's not moving forward fast enough, and people can get out, sometimes they pull the trigger. And does it work? No. You end up in arbitration and you sit for another 3-4 years and your show doesn't go anywhere. But people do get the rights pulled out from under them if they don't lock them down, and sometimes people don't lock them down.
Yeah.
I'm going to make a little bit of a pivot right now, because one of the other things that I'm very concerned about, I think we're all concerned about, and it's been there've been a lot of startling, shocking news articles about it lately. The fragility of our not-for-profit theaters. Some of our institutions are basically not doing very well right now, and things are closing. I mean, Long Wharf is looking for a new home. I don't even know if they're going to stay open. Mark Taper closed. Is that right? No,
canceled their season.
They canceled their season.
Yeah.
And there's the public theater. I was honored to have Mark Russell as a guest speaker about 5 weeks ago, and he came on my show like the day after it was announced that this public theater was cutting under the radar. He knew what was happening, and he told me that this is what was happening, and he said he would come on the show and talk about that anyway. So under the radar was cut, and then the next thing we know, 19% of the staff of public theater is being cut. The list goes on. Remind me who I'm forgetting, if you dare to, if you don't want to.
Well, we're talking about the big ones on both
Both
coasts,
sides.
and,
Yeah,
and
both
you
coasts.
can count on there being smaller ones around the country that have had the same or similar problems.
Well, I'm having a town hall next Thursday night about the state of not-for-profit theater companies,
Yeah.
and I had asked the artistic director of Metropolitan Playhouse to be one of my guests, and he didn't tell me at the time, but he told me this week that their company closed. So he's going to be one of the people talking about it from the artistic director's point of view. He's actually fine about it, but the rest of us aren't as fine about it, because we're seeing our business shrink. It seems.
Well, here's the thing. It's an open secret that not-for-profit theaters, opera companies, ballet companies, they do not live off of profits. The productions are not profitable. They live by donations. They live by grants. The business model is not sustainable as a business. Ticket sales don't keep the doors open. So, those articles say, my good friend Janet Mullet was quoted, all up and down in one of those articles, that donors are moving to climate change and green energy and moving away from the arts. And it's a real hit for an industry that has relied on grants and donations to survive. If the not-for-profits had to charge ticket prices sufficient to keep them open, no one would go.
Amy Stoller is pointing out that Long Wharf, there was a little bit of a Me Too element, but Amy, that was 4 years ago. That had been supposedly solved. But a lot of the conversation that I'd like to basically tiptoe into, if we can, is the fact that a lot of the regional theaters have changed their management, their artistic director, as a result of the awareness of the need for more BIPOC representation. So a lot of the companies have really shuffled and changed, including Oregon Shakespeare. That's another one that's not coming back, I don't think. So what do you think are the elements that have gone into? Let me just say, I have a very simple philosophy about running a company. Don't spend money you don't have. That's kind of my philosophy. That's my philosophy. But we have these companies that have grown huge. Have they grown too fast? Have they grown too big? Does competitiveness mean that everybody has to be the biggest personality at the table?
I think that this problem was already well into gaining momentum, I should say, before the pandemic kicked in.
That's what I think too.
And the theaters were able to keep the doors open because of some of those government programs and grants and things like that sort of held them on, by a thread until, okay, now your doors are back open, get out there and do your thing. And they still, as Eric said, they weren't doing profitable production, and the donor base has slipped away. And I'll tell you that out here, the taper, the subscriber base dropped way down, and part of that is that, yeah, they're trying to be diverse and present all these just a wider variety of things. And audiences, I mean, I have family members who have been subscribers at the Music Center for 40 years or longer, and they've stopped because they said, I keep going to a bunch of shows that I don't want to see, and they turn out to be crap. So, I mean,
well, that certainly is a different problem, isn't it?
But it's all part of the same problem, isn't it? If people aren't coming because you're not putting on shows they want to see, then those numbers, the donors and the grantors are going to look at that and say, well, wait a minute, are you really serving your community?
Well, there's another aspect to that, though,
Sure.
that I've been made aware of. I'm not sure whether it's true or not, but a lot of the companies have been pushing to do less expected works, but they're fighting with the problem of they perceive, I don't know if it's true or not, they perceive that their community isn't open to those new works. And so some of the companies are having problems because they've changed their aesthetic, and the subscriber base hasn't necessarily followed.
Right. How many times can you put on Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and The Music Man when there's all kinds of great new work out there. But if the audiences don't care about the new work or
I like
don't,
to see them as a double bill. That's a good idea.
there's trouble up on the
On the
roof.
roof.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm told that Tim Bond just stepped up at OSF,
Oh, that's good news.
Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So
You
there is a
know-
new artistic director there. That's good to know.
You remind me of a joke. You said that you shouldn't run a business with money you don't have. So two guys walk into a bar, and one says to the other, "How's business?" And the second guy says, "It's great. I bought these beautiful suits from Italy. They're gorgeous. They cost me $200 a unit, and I'm selling them for $150 a unit." And the first guy goes, "Well, how are you going to stay in business?" And the second one says, "Volume."
Volume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See, now, I thought that was a joke.
Hmm.
But when you talk to people in the business world, I'm like, no, that's a perfectly reasonable business model, because you get people in the door by spending money you don't have. Now, I think that theaters have started to understand that they're going to, movie theaters certainly have embraced the fact
Sure.
that in order to be profitable, they need to do more than sell tickets. They have to have the big comfy seats, and you have to get the meals at your seat, even though it kind of interrupts the movie. And there's all this value added that movie theaters are putting in to justify the now $20 ticket price to a film. And I think, Broadway theaters have started to embrace this. I think it was Rock of Ages that was the first show that allowed you to buy drinks and take them to your seat, in those cups with the lids, and now everybody does. But I do think that the concept of a value-added experience, you price something to get people in the door, and then you upsell them. You have a restaurant, you have a bar, you have an enhanced experience. I think that's where the industry is going to have to go. So personally, that's what I think. I think that the days when people are going to spend $200 to be cramped like this for 3 hours are in the rear view.
229, please.
So what we're saying is, like the movie theaters, you're running a snack bar where you also put on plays.
Which hasn't happened yet that I'm aware of.
No, but I think Eric's right that the writing's on the wall to that. You're going to have to give an audience some kind of an experience that they can't get from home watching on a screen, and that offers them more than just the entertainment. I think that they want more. Used to be that a night out for Broadway, you'd spend the $200, but you'd be paying for the meal and the drinks afterwards. Now it's all going into the ticket price, and yeah.
Well, I don't know if I'm sure there are going to be other ideas that people are going to have, but the one thing that's just you can't really get rid of is the fact that the costs of producing shows are so incredibly high, and I don't know how, as a producer, you can figure out a way of a monetary model that would allow the ticket prices to be affordable. The VIP and premium tickets have been a thing that worked for a while, but I'm not sure that's working anymore.
Well, look, I think that the show Six is a prime example of a very profitable property that is very economical to run. I think that productions will have to be, Dear Evan Hansen was very, very successful with a much smaller cast than The Music Man. Come From Away, I think, had a much smaller cast than your traditional Broadway show. I mean, they were also fantastic properties, but I think that, there is an awareness that, yes, your Broadway theater can accommodate a cast of 40, but economically, if you got more than 16 or 12 people on stage, you are really hamstringing.
Bleeding money. Yeah.
Owen, I'm going to ask you to tell me some of the questions in a second, but I want to pivot back to the writer's strike and the SAG strike. The one issue that we're aware of is the AI issue. Mm-hmm. We're aware of the fact that studios want to be able to record an actor who comes in for a day and gets paid for a day, and then uses image in perpetuity. Let's talk about the legalities of that. And let's talk a little bit about IP. What is it? What is intellectual property? And what would the law define as intellectual property in the situation with an actor being photographed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that an actor's likeness or performance is necessarily intellectual property until it's fixed and recorded in some form. And then, yeah, the question is, well, the producers who have caused that recording or capture to be made, they are the owners of the copyright in that material. The issue has been that over the long haul, the actors have been entitled to a residual payment, a reuse fee, essentially, when that clip of them is used in something else, usually negotiated by the actor with the producer of the something else that's incorporating that clip. So what the studios are saying now is, we don't want the actors to be able to hold up a license of clips from this film, or the AI use that we're talking about, the deep fake synthespian creations that are the word. That's I remember 20 years ago we were talking about synthespians when Tom Hanks was shown in scenes with LBJ in
Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump. Yeah, exactly. So
Or
anyway,
Zelig would be another example.
yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
the moment has come when this has become dead simple to make these deep fake presentations of people. And if you have the raw materials, that digitized image of the actor, it's one thing to say, well, we might need it if you get sick and you can't do the last week of shooting, or we might need it. Who was it? Heath Ledger died in the middle of filming a Batman movie, right? And they really had to hustle to make that work. So there are some use cases that seem justified, and yet let's have it in perpetuity and not have to pay anybody ever again is, okay.
A little
so
extreme.
Yeah,
I don't
became
think
a
intellectual
commodity.
property is the answer. There are other laws
Yeah.
that would apply.
Okay.
Yeah, there's federal unfair competition laws.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If you are putting out a performance and you're passing this off as a performance that this actor gave, when in fact this actor did not give it.
Yeah.
If you are creating the impression that this actor authorized this performance, but in fact they did not. This is kind of unfair competition under the federal trademark law, the Lanham Act, where there are courses for recourse other than copyright or trademark. Like if you're putting an actor out of business because you are licensing that actor's image into jobs that actor could have gotten on his or her own, that is classic unfair competition.
So the unfair competition laws are about consumer protection, and yes, that's a component here. But really, if you're coming at it from the actor's point of view, you're looking more at some kind of a property right, or you hope to be, and the right of publicity in some places may apply.
Good.
But here we have a contract trying to, the parties are wanting to negotiate a contract around those things and say, we want the right to do this under contract, so it won't be unfair competition and it won't be a violation of that right of publicity. I'm sorry, Eric, I interrupted you.
Well, let me ask you this. That's certainly an impasse, and I don't think we have a solution to it right now.
Right.
We're not the ones to have to bring up the solutions. But what are the other things that are being challenged right now and holding up the strike?
I think one of the big issues is the method in which AI is being trained.
Does everything in the strike revolve around AI?
No.
Okay.
No. But listen, the creative process inside of a human being will experience life, will experience art. And let's say you're a writer. When you sit down to write, you sit down with the memory and the knowledge of everything you have ever read. You are sampling everything that you have ever experienced and channeling it into your own writing. And it's a very similar process we're using to train artificial intelligence. They are scanning the internet for everything that is publicly available in writing to train these bots how to write. And there is a movement among writers to ask these AI companies to stop sampling their work in the training of their AI. There's another case I want to mention that I think will at some point, some much more connected lawyer than I am is going to make a connection here. You know, there was a Google created a search engine. Google was served, there was a case called Perfect 10, I forget who, number of people. But it was about how Google would scan the internet and pull up thumbnails of photographs and publish these little thumbnails of photographs, copying the photographs without permission in the process to allow people to search for the image that they wanted. Now, technically, this is copyright infringement, but the courts decided, no, this is a transformative use. What Google has done is take these individual images, collect them into a whole, a search engine that does not compete with the images and it serves a very different function. Since it's non-competing and since they're not selling the thumbnails, the fact that it's copying is fair use. Now, what we have now is AI doing the same type of searching, the same type of sampling, but then competing with the source matter. So I think at some point, the fact that there is competition someone is gonna say, hey, this is no longer transformative. You're just putting me out of business. I look forward to that lawsuit just because it'll be really interesting.
How does this relate to sampling in the music business?
Totally different. Sampling, you know, what happened with sampling, it started as kind of like an urban thing. People were very up in arms. I remember I was working with Sony Music at the time in the very, very early 90s. I did a whole brief for them. They were going to sue, and they realized, wait a minute, our artists are doing this too. If we sue, we get sued. They worked out this type of industry thing where when you sample, you give a medley credit, you get this, you get that. It was decided by the industry because it was a circular firing squad. Different set of circumstances altogether.
Okay. And Gordon, I interrupted you. You were about to say something.
No, I was just going to say on the subject of the fair use, you know, we did have the ruling in the Goldsmith, the Warhol Foundation versus Goldsmith case that changed the thinking about that transformativeness aspect, and especially when the work competes with the original. And so maybe that will be useful precedent in these cases involving how the AI ingests the material. But I think the fair use is going to be the big, strong defense that they hang their hat on.
The emotional trigger for all of us, and I don't know if you can deny it. It just seems like AI is putting writers and actors out of business in its ultimate use. I mean, that's where it seems to be heading. How do you stop that? How do you put the reins in on that?
Well, that's what the Writers Guild is trying to do with its strike, is to say to the producers, hey, you still have to employ a certain number of writers. You don't get to replace two of those assistants and one writer in the room on the series with a machine that spits out ideas or outlines or whatever. Still, you know.
Just like AFM tells Broadway producers, you're going into a Broadway house, you need to employ this number of musicians, whether they play or not.
Yeah, didn't David Byrne just ended up having a bunch of musicians sitting there reading their novels or something while the show was going on for that reason.
Well, it's not just AI with the Writers Guild. I mean, it's also they have a lot of grievances about the streaming business model and streaming. Can we talk about that a little bit so that we can at least shine a light on that today?
That's that issue of them not sharing in the upside when a show does well. They want more transparency from the streamers so they can know how's the show doing and then be compensated with some back end payment accordingly. The other answer to that is pay them more upfront and don't worry about it. But the industry is built around a back end model for a lot of this.
Well, I don't understand something, because is this a strike about the basic premise of the basic stance that the companies are taking? Because you get to sign or not sign a contract with somebody. I mean, you get to negotiate your terms. So
these are collectively bargained agreements. This is the union negotiating on behalf of all the writers.
So the
That
writers
here are the
don't.
minimum terms.
Oh, it's minimum terms we're talking about.
So
Okay.
if the union is saying, if you're running a network television show, you need to have 14 people in the writers' room. And there's a breakdown of, you know, who's the leads and who are the executive producers and that kind of thing. And the producers, the Netflixes of the world are saying, we don't need 14, we need 8. And the Writers Guild is saying, no, we need to keep writers working. So, you know, I'm guessing on the numbers, but I think that's a core issue with the use of AI for writers. And the core issue for actors, of course, is the synthespian thing we were talking about a minute ago.
Do we actually know the details of what they're debating right now? Or we just know a couple of these points that are brought.
As I understand it, they're barely talking right now. But the impasse was over the number of people in the writer's room, the use of AI as a replacement for writing services, and the transparency about the streaming viewing, so they could hopefully get some kind of a residual on streaming.
Thank you.
You know, another thing we really should mention is the convergence of a technology entrepreneur mindset with entertainment. You know, Amazon functioned for many, many years at a loss. Uber functioned at many, many years at a loss. Netflix makes money. Most of the streamers are losing money. And they're churning out content in an attempt to, it's a land grab, right? They're looking for space on home viewers' TV sets. So right now, you know, the executives are making money, the companies are losing money. And it's not like an old studio where if the studio didn't make money, it went out of business. These streamers are able to stay alive, losing billions of dollars a year. So the economics are really turned on its head when you're in the middle of that type of a land grab mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess we have to acknowledge that it's a mess and we don't have any answers. But let's turn to the questions in the room. Oh, and do you want to pull out some of the questions that haven't been addressed?
Good thing.
And also see whether the person wants to ask them, or whether or do you understand what they're asking?
Sure thing. This is a question from Eric Rothman. There are tremendous changes coming in all the hardware and software involved in media creation, distribution, and presentation. Changes faster and faster and faster. How do contracts, like the contracts now being negotiated during the strike, deal with issues that are going to happen but are not yet even known?
I think historically they don't. They're so focused on getting past the issues right in front of them that they've left it. They pushed a lot of things down the playing field. We'll deal with that next time. We'll deal with that next time. And that's part of why we are where we are. Streaming was already on the scene 3 years ago when these contracts were last renewed. And you know, the same issues were still there. So why didn't they just get resolved once and for all? Because we don't live in that world.
I tell you, my first job out of law school was working for a copyright guru named Stanley Rothenberg. One of Stanley's many claims to fame was he represented the losing side in the Maytime decision. The Maytime decision was about the fact that the contracts for the film Maytime did not specifically allow for the film to be displayed on television. There was a similar case with Miss Peggy Lee and Lady and the Tramp.
Yeah.
So because of cases like this, lawyers like Gordon and me now in every contract that we ever do add in these little magic words: in any media now known or devised hereafter, throughout the world in perpetuity. And it may be that we might start to get some pushback on that concept, that what we're just, you know, anyway, this is the answer of why contracts now are so open to whatever happens, because it was a decision that was made 70 years ago. Thank you, Stanley. And maybe we're going to have to revisit that Stanley Rothenberg's legacy.
Okay, well, John Ewing, apparently when you raise your hand, you come on screen. So John, you can ask your question, and then we'll come back to Owen.
Okay, man, I have so many comments on this topic today. But first, I'd like to start with AI, because in my opinion, I think all unions on Broadway and film and television should band together and outright reject AI. And in my opinion, here's why. Like there was a gentleman on this Zoom about 6 weeks ago that in about 5 minutes, he literally designed a set using AI.
Tim Kashani,
So,
yes.
okay, yeah. So in my opinion, as a businessman, okay, well, if my competition uses any AI, then it's like it's gonna make it harder for me. Then it's gonna keep moving
in
and
theory,
moving
in
and
theory,
moving,
John,
and next somebody's
John,
gonna
we
gonna
all
write a script.
we all agree with you in theory. However, I don't know if that's feasible. I mean,
I will tell you this. Every company, every player that has resisted the emergence of a new technology has disappeared. Every single one. Adapt or die.
But I just don't
Tell it
think
to
that
Blockbuster, tell it to Tower Records,
Yes.
adapt
Right.
or die.
but still, here's a unique thing about AI, in my opinion. AI is doing things like making Elvis Presley songs and
okay.
making Tupac Shakur songs. And I just feel like, okay, where's gonna be where's the fine line gonna be where what's considered bootleg? Because I've heard that certain people have been sued because they sound like other artists.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying?
So guys, do you have any comment on
I
that?
just feel like it's
John, it's a very emotional topic for all of us. I want to be able to get to a few more people, and we're already running late.
okay.
So,
Yeah, the other day I know what you're talking about, John. The other day I heard a recording. It sounded like Johnny Cash singing "I'm a Barbie Girl," and it was actually really a great mashup. But who's gonna sue? Maybe the publishers that control the song will have some claim for royalties for that performance, but is Johnny Cash's estate gonna be able to claim anybody was actually confused and that was actually him, or that it somehow misused the sound of his voice? Maybe.
I think they would if they could show that they were in the business of licensing the use of his voice for AI, and that this unauthorized use competed with their licensing business, which goes back to my previous point: adapt or die.
Yep.
I agree with you, unfortunately, but I think it's very painful for a lot of us.
And that's an easier analysis when the person in question is deceased. When they're still a living person, the AI part of that gets stickier. Anyway, go on, Bob.
Well,
sorry.
I think I wonder if there's a way of just establishing a standard contract for people that are using AI and make it harder for them to actually use those contracts, and they have to really want to. And there's got to be some sort of compensation somewhere, though. I mean, I don't know.
That's what these unions are really here doing right now, and we've got two sides of these issues that are they may be determined to sort of break each other.
I guess what I'm responding to is adapt or die, which I totally agree with. That's how we found our way to Zoom 3 years ago. But the thing that concerns me is that AI is not going to go away, John. I mean, I don't think you can. I don't think this is a legal way of preventing people from using AI in any situation whatsoever. There may be specific uses of it that people can identify and say this is not allowed, but adapt or die, Eric, I'd like to think that we bring AI into some, but not everything that we're doing, so that we still have certain aspects of the art that remain what they have been. I don't know.
If we look to it as a tool and not a replacement for people and jobs, I mean, there was as Eric said, when Photoshop became a feasible software, there were tons of photo retouchers and art directors and photographers that were up in arms. Oh, this is terrible. We can't allow this. But here we are, you know, what is it, 30 years later? Photoshop is an amazing tool that everybody uses. AI can be
and
that.
misuses, and also misuses.
Fair enough. And AI can and will be similar in that regard. The challenge is I think it's a more disruptive technology. This is going to be, by the way, these AI concerns are going to be on the front and center next year when the equity contract comes up for renewal. Those capture moments and the streams and those kinds of things, someone's going to want the same thing. We want to be able to capture, digitize, and use that for whatever we want later on. And then all of a sudden, you've got actors who appeared on a stage on Broadway showing up in a commercial or something that they never had anything to do with.
God, I hope a compromise. I hope somebody comes up with a compromise. The fact that they're not even talking to each other is terrifying. Yeah. Can you guys stay a little bit longer, because there are a lot of questions that we haven't gotten to? Eric, is that okay? I mean, I know you have personal obligations. You okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Owen, you want to continue?
Sure. Here's from Judith. This is off of that most recent point, actually. What do Eric and Gordon think of the idea of live streaming all or some special performances with online audiences buying tickets to see along with the in-person audiences? Is it economically viable for certain productions, probably Broadway?
And will equity allow it?
And the writers and everybody else involved. Will everybody allow it?
Every year they come out with this list of the most powerful people in the theater industry. Number 1, number 2, number 3, the Schuberts, the Nederlanders, and Hugh Jansen. Why? Location, location, location. And I think that the idea of allowing the Broadway experience without actually being on Broadway it will be very challenging. It challenges the aspirational aspect of a ticket to a Broadway show. And it's not just the Broadway theaters. You know, the tourism dollars are very important to New York City. When people are watching at home, they don't go to the restaurants, they don't go to the bars, they don't go to the hotels. I think that there would be a lot of resistance to that from a number of sources.
Okay, next up.
Sure thing. Here's from Janet Conrad. How are theater tours for small shows doing? Is there still a college touring market and a library performance market?
Oh, I have no idea.
I think the answer is probably yes to that, because those are the venues and environments that are least affected by all the problems that we're having right now. That takes us back to our roots, back to the small theater roots. Colleges is a little bit of a question, though, because colleges have some of the best theater technology in our country. I think I had Victoria Lang and Ryan Bogner talking about their touring business like a couple months. I should check in with them and see what's going on with that now. Obviously, nothing was happening for the 2 years of quarantine, but I think that's an easier restart. I might be wrong. I think you can really push the restart button on that, all of that, because a lot of it is very low maintenance and not particularly money-making aspects of theater that people just do because we love to. Oh, John's back.
I think it's still a real big challenge to get people out of their houses and into a crowded room full of people sitting shoulder to shoulder. I think a lot of people still are uncomfortable with that.
But the model, the financial model, for the smaller kinds of productions, mm-hmm. they can get by and not be making. They've never made a lot of money, so yeah. Oh boy, something new with this is new with Zoom. And now when everybody raises their hand, they come on screen. So all right, let's just open it up and say, come on screen, everybody, and ask your questions. Eric, you first, and then John Ewing. Eric Rothman.
Oh, hi. What are the possible or even likely consequences of a resolution of the current strike, which is mostly film and video, for theater?
I don't know, Eric, do you think the resolution on the AI stuff will find its way as a model for what happens next year when equity is up for renewal? That's all I could really see as being maybe setting up a paradigm.
I think that the realities of the industries are different. That Broadway producers make their money off of live performance. And so they have a vested interest in not allowing recordation. They want, that's how they make their money. Once they buy into, so I think the financials are different. You will have equity fighting tooth and nail against it. I honestly don't know in 10 years if equity will still exist. We'll just have to see.
Okay, so let's go. John Ewing had something else he wanted to say, and then Eric.
Okay, a couple quick points.
Do you have questions, John?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Don't you guys think, Gordon and Eric, that I think what the union should do is force the streamers to open up all of the books? Because it doesn't seem like they're asking that. And the reason why I say that is because that's the only way to truly calculate what your value is. So in terms of television, DVDs, all of that, they know if it's streaming, they know the value of it if it's on TV. Streamers don't want to show that secret sauce. And I think they have to do that. And answer that in this one thing, and I'd like to get your thoughts on.
Well, the unions can't force them to do it, but they can be laws passed.
Yeah, in a context of a labor negotiation, yeah, I'm not sure how you force anyone to do anything.
We're not forced, but in this negotiation. So I feel like the same way in 10 years Netflix became the biggest film studio. I'd like to get you guys' opinion on this. I think the Broadway community, if it wanted to, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but I think in 10 years they could totally cannibalize and eat the film industry just the way Broadway does business. I could tell you so many stories. It's ridiculous. I mean, Hollywood is almost in business of ripping filmmakers off. You have to have attorneys to be able to put stuff in contracts, like in the event of if the company is sold or a bankruptcy, all rights transfer to producer, back to producer. I know companies that have just went out and acquired 50 films and filed bankruptcy and then licensed them to other people. But the transparency of Broadway, the way they raise money, the way they split up into teams and do everything, like it's just so, there's no secrets. And you just have the fundraiser, the producer, and the exhibitor.
I think the Broadway model, the reason why there's more transparency is because there are laws about it. Right. I think it's much more carefully looked after by the law, by New York state law.
Oh no, I completely disagree. No, New York law has nothing to do with it. New York law was preempted in 1996. The New York State Attorney General has nothing to say about it. Listen, Broadway, the dirty secret of Broadway is that 1 in 3 shows maybe makes a profit. Broadway depends on investments from $25,000 investors who, have money to burn and are buying the experience. They give you $25,000 because they want to come to opening night. They want their picture with the star, whoever it is, and they don't care if they see the money back. They write it off as a loss and they take it as a tax break against other income that they have.
But that still doesn't explain why Broadway is so open and so transparent in its finances, and the other entertainment. I don't think that it's
open or transparent at all. It's one of the most closed environments I have ever encountered. It is all private placements. The law allows Broadway producers to raise money online within certain parameters. None of them do it, because in order to do it, they would have to be more transparent. Yeah. They have the people that they go to. They have their standards. It is a closed shop. It is very hard to break into it.
I think you do see transparency on things like ticket sales, and I think that's partly a matter of tradition, partly a matter of the Dramatists Guild and the unions sort of insisting on that from a very early time, but also it's bragging rights. The producers like to brag that their show is doing so well, that they've recouped in X number of weeks. At least the successful ones do. And so the numbers are out there. And if a producer decides not to share their numbers, then everybody's asking why.
But
And so it's
I
a
don't see
little
why
bit of
that wouldn't be why wouldn't that be the same in Hollywood?
Oh, man.
Well, certainly Hollywood movies share their ticket sales, the
Yeah.
same, but you know, if a show is saying, bragging, okay, we're bringing in $1 million a week, you don't know if it costs 500,000 or 800,000 a week to run that show. You don't know how long that show is going to have to run to recoup. All of that is a closely held secret. The most you get is every once in a while you get an announcement, hey, we recouped.
All right, let's move on. Amy and Judith. Judith is still here. Amy, did you need to leave or something? Oh, there you are. Amy, you can go, and then Judith.
Okay, my question, for whatever it was worth, is going back to a slightly earlier topic, is how much of the cost of Broadway shows is related to the cost of New York real estate?
30%?
Don't know. I think that the theater owners own the theaters. I don't think that they're renting them.
Well, but even if they own them, then they have to pay taxes. So there's still an issue about that. I don't know, which is why I'm asking. But you know, you can own a theater and not own the plot of land it's on. New York real estate is very complicated. So I'm just wondering how much that adds to the overall cost of mounting Broadway shows.
Well, I'm not sure how. I'm not sure. There's this. The thing that I thought you were asking is how much of a Broadway show's budget is real estate, is the theater.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking, but I don't really, I mean, if it's the wrong question, that's cool.
Well, mine is an answerable question. I'm not sure yours is.
Aha. Okay, that's cool.
You know, I think that if, aside from the fact that they are a theater organization, if the Schuberts thought they could make more money by knocking down one of their theaters and building a mall, I think they probably would. And, you know, so the value of the real estate they're sitting on does factor in, but
This is becoming more and more terrifying. Okay, go on.
No, but I think that, well, but they're committed. I think they are, historically, they're committed to the theater, and they've got a lot of sunk cost and investment in building these theaters in the first place. So they must have concluded that they can't, or at least not yet. Yeah, but what percentage of the ticket price that a customer goes and pays for at the theater? It's Eric, you have a sense. It's pretty small percentage, wouldn't you say?
I don't think that the cost of New York real estate is what's driving ticket prices. I just don't think it's really a factor. I think it's much more union costs, and the cost of materials. No, I don't think that that's a significant factor.
Okay, thank you.
Judith, unmute yourself. Makes it easier to hear.
Yes, sorry. I do want to make one comment about what was just said, but I had originally raised my hand. I'll do that first. When I was talking about the possibility of streaming a particular performance, I mean, that's it. You stream it and it's gone. You can't.
No recording.
That was one. But I do want to say I was on one show where it was doing very well, and then January came and ticket sales went way down, and Bernie Jacobs loved the show, and he did not charge rent for the 5 months that we continued to run. So I just wanted to comment about that.
You know, to answer your question about streaming, there is a business, Fathom Events. And what they will do is get the right to stream to movie theaters, certain events. I don't think it's hit Broadway yet, but certainly opera is a big one. And so there is a business model out there that allows it. Theater hasn't really embraced it. But you go and you buy your ticket and you see the show, and then, it is what it is.
Yeah, the thing, my thinking was that there, as you've talked about, people are not going to the theater because they're uncomfortable because of disease and so forth. And this would allow people to go. It would increase the audience for that, for that performance. So that was, I thought, maybe a good idea. But
I'm
no.
going to have to end right now for podcast and YouTube. Although it doesn't mean that we have to leave, but I do want to thank Eric and Gordon. It's been a difficult conversation, and I'm not sure whether we covered everything that we needed to cover. But
we're lawyers. We're supposed to make you worry. That's our job.
Well, I'm fretting. I'm not any more comfortable about the situation now than I was when we started the conversation. But that's basically where we are right now. So thank you, Eric Goldman. Thank you, Gordon Firemark, and thank you everybody in the room for being here today and at least looking at a complicated issue right now. We don't have any answers. We did not solve the world's problems today, but we looked at some of the issues and we've asked some of the questions. So I want to thank everybody for being with me today. I want to tell people out there in YouTube land and podcast land, if you've stumbled upon Theater Resources Unlimited, you found us by chance and you like what we're doing, and you want to hear more conversations about theater and what's going on in the arts, please feel free to become part of my community. It's not hard. You can email me. I'm at trunltd@aol.com. It's trunltd@aol.com. I will put you on the Zoom list. We'll invite you every week, and so you can be part of the conversation and ask questions and contribute and be part of the community. I'd really invite you to do that. We do this for free. We've been doing it for free since April 17, 2020. It's a lot of free. We've been giving out a lot of free. I think it would be nice if people would consider supporting us. You can do that by going to TRUDonate, trudonate.com, trudonate.com, and you can give us a little money, or when you come to these things, you can give us a little donation. We're doing it as a community service. We're going to continue doing it as a community service. I'm staying with Zoom because this is the only way I can actually serve communities outside of the New York area. We have people here from all over the country and all over the world sometimes. So I hope that will be including you in the future. Thank you, everyone. I hope you'll join us next week. Our conversation will be about non-traditional theater. We're going to have Ann Hamburger from On Guard Arts and the legendary Anita Durst, who has a company called Shishama. And we're going to talk about theater that doesn't take place in a theater. So you might find that interesting. See you all soon, I hope.